to start the stream. Let's close it off. That looks fine. Okay. It's my great pleasure to be joined today by former Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Ben Habib. Ben, thanks for joining me today.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me, Frank.
Yeah. So Ben, I know you've obviously toured the studios and you've probably told this 20, if not 30 times in the last couple of days, but for any readers or viewers who don't know your position, could you give us a brief summary of your reasons for severing ties with Reform UK?
Yeah, so I'll just direct viewers, if I may, Frank, first of all, to the video that I did on the 28th of November, which is on my Twitter feed, explaining my reasons step by step as to why I was severing my ties with the party. And also to an article I wrote in the Express yesterday, which I'm sure is still available online. If they're going to do a search for Ben Happy, they'll find it. And but in a nutshell, I have always been, even before I joined Reform UK, unhappy about the absence of any genuine form of democratic say that its members, uh, I think, should have. And and I said to Richard Tice, who invited me to join the party at the time when I was kindly invited to join, that democratization was a key aspect for me because I don't think it's right that one man should control a political party. And the structure of Reform UK is as a private limited company with shares in which Nigel Farage, no matter how great a man he may be, Nigel Farage owns 60% of the interest. So that's de facto controlled by Nigel. And I've been banging that drum. Many people have said to me, Ben, do this privately, don't do it publicly. Well, I've been doing it privately.
Mm.
I've only gone public recently. You know, it's one of the things about going public is you only really become aware of it in the public because I've gone public. If I was doing it privately, you wouldn't have been aware of it at the time. And I have been doing it privately, but Reform, contrary to all the promises they've made, haven't democratized. And in many respects, actually, I think that they've slightly hoodwinked their own people because Nigel said he would convert the company that he owns from one being limited by shares to one being limited by guarantee. You actually legally can't do that. You would have to set up a new company. A new company hasn't been set up.
Right.
And he said, and Zia Yusuf said they're coming up with this fantastic new constitution, which will create a democracy. And actually, what they produced was a document that I'd rejected a year and a half ago. They'd altered it a little bit. But I personally don't think it delivers the democracy that they say that they would deliver. But moreover, they haven't even applied to the Electoral Commission for the adoption of this constitution, such as it is. So they've taken no active steps to give their membership, their notional, in inverted commas, membership, a say in the party. And I also got that's crucial for me. That's
Yeah.
it doesn't, there's no perfect democracy. There are lots of different ways this can be done. But at the moment, it's not done in any shape or form. And, that's an issue for me. Then I do have some differences with Nigel on political philosophy. And instead of going through all of those, I would direct people to the little video that I did on Thursday, as well as my article yesterday, because I enumerate them. But the final straw for me was hearing that headquarters had banned me from speaking to grassroots reform members. So clearly I'd become persona non grata with reform. And if I had become persona non grata with reform, it was untenable for me to stay in the party. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
that's pretty clear. And Nigel made his glee at my departure very clear. He said, I think he sang the song, The Sun Has Got His Hat On.
Yeah,
Hip,
I
hip,
saw that. Yeah.
hooray. He said it was a champagne moment. It was the icing on the cake of an already great day. And he said I was bitter and twisted. I'm not bitter and twisted. Um, I just don't do bitter and twisted. There's no advantage in being bitter and twisted. I'm too long in the tooth to be bitter and twisted. Bitter and twisted is a reaction you get when I think it's an emotional reaction you get when you can't fully reconcile yourself with something that's happened. I'm entirely reconciled with the view that reform has taken with me. I'm also 59 years old. I've been round the track many times. I've had many setbacks in my life. This setback, to the extent it is a setback, wouldn't engender a bitter and twisted emotion in me. The emotion that I have in me is a desire to simply do my best to make sure reform does the right thing by the movement that I help create. And as I've said many times, we have an obligation to that movement. We have an obligation to this country to deliver it, as I see it, from the peril in which we now find ourselves, to deliver the country from the peril in which it is. And that's all I care about. That is, frankly, all I care about. I'm not bitter. I'm not twisted. I think that's really all I probably want to say on the subject. But, we can talk about it more if you want to, Frank.
That's lovely. Thanks, Ben. Yeah. See what you were saying there about like Farage's reaction. It surprised me, and it leads me to believe that there's stuff going on behind the scenes. Obviously, the public doesn't know. I think the first inkling, probably most of the people outside of reform got that there were some problems when you were very unceremonially replaced by Richard Tice after post-election. And, Farage can say, well, Richard Tice won his seat, you didn't win your seat. And obviously he had plans to manoeuvre Zia Youssef into the chairman's seat. But a lot of the public were very unhappy. I remember that period. I think even there was a slight dip in the polls, which reflected. I remember there was an awful lot of talk on social media that this is wrong. You're a very popular figure within the party. Was there stuff at that time going on behind the scenes that the public is not aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was banging the drum for the democratization of the party. Um, there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and I mean, there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and some of it, some of it isn't. I don't think there's any enlightenment for those listening for me to go through detail on it. But suffice to say, I was banging the drum for democratization. I also had issues, for example, with the way our alliance with the traditional unionist voice had been treated. I don't know, Frank, if you're aware, but when I was deputy leader, Richard and I did a deal with the traditional unionist voice of Northern Ireland to support them. They're the true unionist voice in Northern Ireland. I donated £50,000 to the TUV for its general election campaign to support them in the alliance that we had with Reform. Reform had with TUV, and their leader Jim Allister was standing against Ian Paisley of the DUP, and the DUP had done the dirty on the United Kingdom by lying, effectively saying that the deal that they'd got with Rishi Sunak, the safeguarding the union deal, had removed the Irish Sea border, which isn't true. And in fact, it was their lying that prompted us to have this relationship with TUV. Anyway, so Reform had an alliance with the TUV, and I had supported the TUV with this donation of £50,000 for its general election. And during the course of the general election, Nigel endorsed Ian Paisley and Sammy Wilson, and the TUV had candidates against Ian Paisley and Sammy Wilson who were of the DUP. And so there was stuff going on.
Right.
There was stuff going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about the party's position on immigration, because it's appeared, again, I think post-election, that there's, maybe schism is too strong a word, but there's definitely disparate points of view within the party. And everything I've heard you say about immigration seems to match the public mood, which is we have to stop this, especially the illegal immigration. We have to deport illegals, no questions. Doesn't matter how long it takes. If you're here illegally, you have to go for various obvious reasons, but simply for the fact that that we've got to show those who want to come in illegally that it's not going to happen. And Nigel Farage has, he's made immigration his trump card for the last 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden he's very much softened his stance. He was interviewed a few weeks back. I wrote a piece on it, and he
By
was
Steve
asked
Edgington.
repeatedly that would he go for mass deportations, and he said no, and he was sort of a little bit equivocating on the reason. So he was like, first of all, it's kind of unworkable, but the public are not going to stand it. That seems to be, was that like a major problem? And do you know why he seems to have softened his stance on immigration?
So I think, let me just tell you what my position is, if I may, just to make my position clear. As you indicated, anyone in the United Kingdom, and I think there are over 1 million illegal migrants, people who've entered this country illegally, anyone in the United Kingdom here illegally should be detained and deported. There is no justification to be in our country illegally. And it doesn't matter if it's a logistically difficult exercise. Of course, I grant deporting 1.2 million people is a very difficult exercise, but it needs to be national policy. And in itself, that might deter other illegal migrants from coming to the country, migrants who are considering coming to the country illegally. It should deter them. Number one. Number two, legal migration is way over the top. And actually, we need to not just slash legal migration, we need to have programs for the incentivization and establishment of repatriation of people who are in the United Kingdom. We have had more immigration into this country in the last 25 years than we have had in all of history before that. No country can tolerate the assault on its economy and its culture that we have experienced as a country in the last 25 years. So the rate of demographic change is critical, and it's been happening way too fast. And then we've had superimposed on that rate of demographic change policies, regulations, policies, and laws which progressively discriminate in favor of immigrants against the majority population. Yeah. And when you combine those three things together, and it's important to be able to see them all together, what you are effectively seeing is the end of the nation state of the United Kingdom. And so, in my view, we have to stand against the rapid changing demography. We have to stand absolutely without any latitude on people who've come to the country illegally. And we've got to be absolutely clear that we will reverse any regulations and laws which progressively discriminate in favor of minorities, and that we will pass laws, if necessary, to make sure that the majority British culture is used to integrate those who are in this country. And that's how I see it. Now, you would probably be best advised to ask Nigel how he sees it. But the Steve Edgington interview, which is the one I think to which you're referring,
yeah, that's right.
He did in that interview say that rapid change in demography doesn't concern him, and that he wouldn't be in favor of mass deportations. And I can't answer for Nigel. I really don't know why he said that, but there would appear to be a preparedness and inclination in the pursuit of appealing to a broader electorate, in the pursuit, I think, of appealing to what Nigel and others may see as Tory voters. He's softening his stance on certain issues. And it's not, for me, that's an issue, because I don't think you save the country by softening your stance. And others may say, well, Ben, wait, if he can soften his stance, garner votes, get into government, then he can do what's required. My response is, don't mislead the electorate. Make it utterly clear what it is for which you stand. And if they want to vote for you, they'll vote for you. And I think it's a crucial component of the way reform should act, or indeed any honest actor should act, that they tell the truth about their aims. Because we've had too much political expediency too much playing the 24-hour news cycle in order to garner, popular support. And we've got to become a party, and we've got to be people in politics of principle.
Yeah.
Say what it is that we believe in, and then for God's sake, stick to it and deliver it. And I'm not impugning reform. I'm not seeking to do that. I'm just saying how I think the game should be played.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, because otherwise you're left in a position where you're trying to guess. Is Nigel, does he really believe? Has he had some kind of Damascene conversion, or is he playing politics? Neither of those are as good as just telling the truth, letting us know where
Yeah.
you stand, and you take your chance at the ballot box. Ben, in light of that, I wanted to move on to the topic of Islam, which I think is Farage's Achilles heel, if I may say that. I'm a big supporter of reform of Farage generally, but I think if you see something wrong, you have to call it out. It's just honest. He he has spent the last, I think, 15 years being very careful to avoid the topic of Islam generally, and he's been very careful to keep the brand clean, as it were. So back in the UKIP days, he was very, very careful to distance himself from Anne-Marie Waters, who I think was tipped for the leadership at one point. Tommy Robinson subsequently, and Reform and Brexit Party first, then Reform. And both he and Richard Tice have made pretty disparaging comments about the likes of Tommy Robinson, the far right, as it were, that lot. And I was extremely proud to see that you refused to do that. You were, I think you were interviewed or you wrote a piece about it. But basically, I don't know Tommy Robinson personally. I don't know what his stance is, but I'm not just going to throw people under the bus for the sake of keeping the brand clean. And it seems to me there's something almost Labourish, the disregard for the working class vote, the working class position on these things. Do you think that Farage genuinely underestimates the threat posed by radical Islam, or is he playing politics? Is he exactly as you say? Is he trying to get into office and then come clean? What's the position?
So the lack of preparedness to have a discussion about Islam is born, I think, out of the regulations and laws to which I referred earlier, where we as a nation have become obliged to protect and promote minorities. And it is part now of our political and social fabric through these regulations and laws to which we've been adhering for many, many years to be extremely nervous of challenging minority uh, religions and cultures in our country, frankly. We've
Yeah.
lost the courage to do it because we've been regulated and legally told we shouldn't and can't do it. In fact, we are obliged to progressively discriminate in their favor. So I think the bedrock of fear is born out of regulations and laws, which reform any entity that wishes to save this country needs to stand firmly against. So the enemy in the room are regulations and laws that have been passed by previous governments that enable minority religions and minorities to rule the roost over the majority. That's the enemy in the room. The enemy in the room, of course, as far as our culture is concerned, is the rapid demographic change, which we touched on earlier, and also, again, this progressive discrimination. And what we need to create is a regulatory and legal environment where our culture is imposed on anyone who wishes to live in the United Kingdom. And they don't have to believe in Christianity, but they have to accept cultural Christianity. They have to accept the basic foundations of Christianity, which include being prepared to have an open discussion about your faith. There is not a Christian in this country who would kill me if I were to say something outrageous about Christ. I'm not moved to say anything outrageous about Christ, but there is not a Christian in this country who would kill me. And it was telling for me that the Dean of Trinity College, I don't know if you know this story, Frank, but the Dean of Trinity College 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, endorsed one of his, I think one of his fraternity in their description of Jesus Christ, looking like a transgender individual,
Yes,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
and he endorsed. I think his name's Bannister. The dean's name is Bannister, and he endorsed the description of Jesus Christ's wound on his chest, which this fellow described as looking like a vagina. The wound that Jesus was given when he was on the cross by a Roman centurion or guard or whatever, and he likened it to a vagina, and the dean of Trinity College, charged with the protection of Christianity at Trinity College, Cambridge, no less, endorsed this individual's right to describe Jesus in that way.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. I mean, you couldn't be more insulting, in my view, to the prophet of Christianity than to say he looks transgender and he's got a vagina. He's trying to basically support transgender ideology. That's what that was all about. Nothing happened to him. But then you have the story of the grammar school teacher in Batley who circulated caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. That was 3 years ago, and he's still in hiding.
Still in hiding. Yeah.
And that tells you everything you need to know. And I think there are a few mistakes made, if I may say so, by people on our side of the debate when they discuss Islam. The first mistake that they make is that they wish to limit their discussion to extremist Islamists. And so they're prepared to talk about extremist Islamism, and they sanitize themselves when they just talk about extremist Islamism, because when you talk about extremism, no one can fault you for talking about extremism. It's extremist. So by definition, you're right to call it out.
Sure, yeah.
But actually, what they should be calling out is fundamentalist Islam. It's not extreme. Extremism is where you get to if you don't check fundamentalism. And a large swathe of the world now practices what I would call fundamentalist forms of Islam. It wasn't always the case. Islam was a more liberal religion. For example, when I was a child, I was born in Pakistan, and Islam was a very liberal, not very liberal. It was more liberal than it is now. So I'll give you an example, Frank. When I was a child, you could say Khuda Hafiz, the customary salutation when you left someone was Khuda Hafiz, which is God bless you or God be with you. Now in Pakistan, the culture requires you to say Allah Hafiz. And the reason you say Allah Hafiz, which is Allah bless you or Allah protect you and so on, is because Khuda Hafiz, God bless you, is too generic.
Sure, yeah.
Khuda could be any god. It could be a Hindu god, a Christian god, or whatever. And that has been the progression of Islam. And the biggest, I think, threat that comes out of Islam is the Wahhabi form of Islam, which has no truck with any revisions, any modernizing, any evolution. Now, one of the greatest things that Christianity has managed to achieve is its own evolution with modernity. As we've gone through the centuries, Christianity has learnt to adapt to the political scene around it. Wahhabi Islam will not adapt. It is a purist form of Islam. And I think one of the problems that but obviously Wahhabis have, but one of the issues with Islam, full stop, is that the Quran is the word of God,
Yeah.
as transcribed by Muhammad, dictated to him by the angel Gabriel. And if the Quran is the word of God, then it is beyond reproach. It is beyond evolution. You cannot improve the perfect. And I think that is the fundamental grappling. That's the fundamental difficulty with the ideology that is Islam. The Quran is the word of God. And we in the West, the reason we have progressed so much, or one of the reasons we've progressed so much, technologically, legally, politically, philosophically, is because we challenge everything. There's no sacred cows, for want of a better expression. We will debate everything. And that's not the case with Islam. And you would have seen Tahir Ali, for example, an MP. I can't remember which
Yeah, yeah,
constituency
yeah,
he represents,
yeah.
but he was inviting the the
Blasphemy
Islam
laws.
to bring back. But yeah,
Yeah,
effectively, he said to protect the Abrahamic laws from being desecrated, the books of the Abrahamic. But of course, what he was really calling for was a protection for Islam, and he's calling for that protection because, like many Muslims, he's not prepared to challenge the texts
yeah,
of the Quran. And so, what we've got to do, I think, as a country, is I mean, we've got to be aware of that. We've got to be prepared to have an intellectual discussion about it. And we've got to, however, we've got to treat the problem in a generic way. We shouldn't be making laws against Islam. What we should be doing is making laws which protect and promote our Christian heritage, our Christian culture, our Christian values, and our culture generally in the United Kingdom. So I think one mistake some people make is to basically make Islam the enemy and say, right, okay, Islam's the enemy. What are we going to do to tackle Islam? And the threat is not just, it, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Wahhabi Islam is a threat. Um, some Shias will be a threat to Sunnis, two different sects of Islam. Some Sunnis will be a threat to Shias. And what we're creating in this country, Frank, is lots of different silos, not of necessarily just Islamic silos, lots of different forms of Islam are being grown in the United Kingdom, and they're not being encouraged to integrate. Through progressive discrimination, through the protection of diversity, equality, and inclusion, equity and inclusion, or they are given shelter. And what we're going to see is not just friction between Islamic communities and Christian communities. We will see friction. I predict this. We will see friction between Muslims, Muslim on Muslim friction, which is so prevalent across the Muslim world. I mean, in Pakistan the other day, a country about which I know something, 60 Shias were killed by Sunnis, in a sectarian, violent attack. And that's because they're not the right kind of Muslim.
mm,
So it's a much bigger issue. It's a much bigger issue. And I think the solution to it comes from being self-confident as a country and imposing our values and our culture on those who choose to live in this country, and do that uniformly to
yeah.
Hindus, to Buddhists, to atheists, to anyone. Anyone, you want to live here, you got to buy into our culture. Does that make sense?
Exactly right. Yeah. That's why I think it's been so dispiriting to see Farage's recent comments. I'm not sure if it was the Edgington interview, but recently he made, let me read this out here because I forgot the wording. If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. I was worried when he made that comment. I think I understand it.
But he's tackling it the wrong way, if I may
Yeah,
say so, Frank. What he needs to say is anyone in this country needs to accept our values and our
exactly right.
culture, and it's got to be taught at school.
But as my reading of that was, sorry, excuse me. My reading of that was, as he said that, what he seemed to imply was two things. One, we can't win by just having one law, which is the only way you can do anything anyway. But two, he seemed to be implying that we have to make concessions. The problem is already too big that we cannot just assert our confidence in our values. And I mean, tell me if I'm well off here, but the timeline post-election from your replacement with Richard Tice and Richard's replacement with Zia Youssef as obviously fundraiser or backer, however you want to see it. He's obviously a very articulate, intelligent man, very successful man. Is it a mere coincidence that he's a Muslim?
You'd have to ask Nigel. I don't know. I've only shaken hands with Zia once,
Oh, okay.
and I've got no idea why he was brought in as chairman. I've got no idea. I wasn't associated with the decision. I wasn't consulted. It was just done.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, we spoke off camera, and I think neither of us wants to spend time bashing Nigel Farage. But I did want to ask you one question about his response, which really surprised me. And I think if it was true, his response, I still think he handled it incredibly badly. He what did he call it? The reform's doing very well. He had a good day, and he said it was the icing on the cake. Um, and I couldn't understand what he meant by that, because if he generally has any sort of animosity towards you, surely that'd be best kept in private. I don't think it does him any favors. But it made me think of quite a few public fallouts he's had in the past. I think from sort of the UKIP days, Alan Scared, and then Douglas Carswell and Suzanne Evans, and probably I could go on. Um, what's your read on Farage's reaction to you severing ties with the party?
So was it Winston Churchill who said that if you haven't got enemies in life, you've never really tried to do anything, or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
to that effect? So I mean, I can't. Nigel is 60 years old. He's been on the political stage for a long time. He's bound to have created enemies. I've created enemies, no doubt, because whenever you're holding forth, you're going to have enemies and you're going to have fallouts. And that's, in a sense, that's almost a testimony to Nigel, because he's doing stuff.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
got some kind of debate going on and he's having a scrap. And scrap is good. It's good for diversity of thought. Let's all have intellectual debates. And through that intellectual debate, as I've been kind of indicating, the right answers should emerge. And so I can't fault him because he's fallen out with people in the past. Um, and he's entitled to despise me if he does. That's fine. I haven't got an issue with that either. I don't despise him, by the way. I think
Yeah.
Nigel's done great things for this country. He put the EU debate on the map. As it happened, I don't think we've got Brexit, and I think we should still be fighting that fight for reasons which I can bore you with if you're interested, but I think it's a crucial fight. We talk about, I'm going to just say a couple of things on it.
Mm.
We talk about this country not having a written constitution. Actually, the closest we have now to a form of constitutional documentation are the two treaties we signed with the EU as we left. The withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement go to the heart of the way the United Kingdom is able to govern itself, including, as we know, leaving Northern Ireland behind in the European Union. And they're constitutional documents which are an affront to the sovereign democratic unit that is the United Kingdom. They're constitutional documents which assault our sovereignty, which assault our democracy. And we need to fight to have those documents either amended or, ideally, in my view, removed,
Sure.
to restore our democracy, because those constitutional documents, they are in effect constitutional documents, even though they're international treaties, and they are prohibiting us from being able to be sovereign and independent. They're not the only ones. There are other treaties we've signed of a similar nature which give away power to foreign courts and foreign bodies to our own detriment. And one of the things that I wanted really Richard to promise, which he did, was that we would go on fighting for Brexit. Brexit ain't done. Brexit
Yeah.
ain't done. We've got to go on fighting that fight. If we want to save the United Kingdom, if we want to get rid of progressive discrimination, if we want we want the ability to impose our own culture on people coming here, we've got to Brexit properly. Because embedded in all of that framework is the impossibility of us doing what we wish to and what we need to for our country.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to ask you briefly, Ben, about reform itself, which I'm sure you're still very interested in, even though you've severed ties. I mean, they're riding high at the moment. I think polling's pretty good. They just had a key defection, Andrea Jenkins, 100,000 members, and the promise. I don't know how true this is, but $100 million from Elon Musk. That'd be quite a nice war chest. In terms of yourself, is there any chance of some kind of future rapprochement with the party?
So I have the great privilege, Frank, of not needing to be in politics. I'm only in politics, and people would have heard me say this before, and a lot of politicians say this and don't mean it. I say it, and I really mean it. I'm only in politics because I think the country is facing real disaster. And I think it's absolutely vital that we have a set of principles and a philosophy which is capable of rescuing the country. And if reform adopts those policies and philosophy and looks like a fighting force that's going to save the country, I will be delighted to disappear off the political scene. Um, I'm on the political scene because I think it's critical that we stay true to those principles, and I'm seeing signs in reform which wobble me. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be where we are, and um, and so the answer is that I've got to basically keep an eye on what the hell's going on over the next few months and then decide what it is that needs to be done in order to give effect to what I believe the country needs.
Yes. That was really my final question was, where does Ben Habib go from here? I have heard mutterings of setting up another party. I'm not sure if there's any legs in that.
Well, I think if Nigel takes reform to a more mainstream position because he's currying favor with a broader demographic for votes, um, that leaves that space on the, I don't like the expression, but on the right-hand side of politics that reform used to or should be occupying, it leaves it wide open, leaves it wide open. And, we've got a really crowded centrist set of parties
For sure.
already, haven't we? Um,
And left wing.
Conservatives, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, everyone's either in my view, everyone's either in the center or left wing. And that doesn't mean I'm right wing, by the way. I just think I believe in the country. I believe in the democratic unit that is the constitutional unit of the United Kingdom, which somehow gets you categorized as being far right nowadays.
Yeah.
But I'm not, and I don't see myself as far right. So, but my aim will be to deliver a rescue. My aim is to rescue the United Kingdom, and I will just be watching what goes on and cut my cloth according to what needs to be done in order to give effect to what I believe is required. And I hope reform. I hope reform does it. I actually, I frankly hope that reform blooming does it.
Yeah. Me too. Ben Habib, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.